The score's tied in the bottom of the ninth inning of Game 7 of the World Series. You're at the plate, and the count is full, 3 balls, 2 strikes. To borrow from a certain rapper, your palms are sweaty, your knees are weak, your arms might even be a little bit heavy, as the crowd is chanting your name while you step outside the batter's box to regain your composure. Then you step up to the plate and call your shot, pointing to the right field wall. You stare down the opposing pitcher as he begins his windup, and then the pitch. A perfect fastball exactly where you want it. You swing with all your might, and crack! You smack that ball hard. It rises up over the opposing team. It could be. It might be. It's going. It's gone! You just hit a game-winning World Series clinching home run, and the crowd goes wild. Any kid who ever swung a bat dreamed of such a scenario, right? I know I did, and I wasn't a very good ball player. But even with my lackluster baseball skills, I still dreamed of such life-changing, game-altering heroics. And I know I'm not alone. Fueled by a similar childhood dream, my guest today spent several years pursuing that vision. He's a teacher in the Indianapolis area and well-known among old-school Central Indiana social media influencers and the national dad blogging community. In fact, that's how I got to know him some 10 years ago. All of us know him, though, as Creed, and he's an incredibly great dude. He didn't quite make it to the major leagues and never hit that World Series clinching home run, but his passion for the game still runs deep. This summer, Creed shared a historical presentation about the Negro Leagues at a symposium at the National Baseball Hall of Fame. So even though it was not the most traditional path to the Hall of Fame, Creed still ended up at Cooperstown. And he graciously shared his experience right here on the Matt Dan Toddcast podcast. Welcome to the Matt Dan Toddcast podcast. I'm your host, Matt, the guy with 3 first names and a face made for podcasting. But you can call me Matt Dan Todd for short. Creed, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I appreciate it.
I know who you are. I've known you for several years, but I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine anyone not knowing who Creed is, but how about you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself anyway?
Well, you've heard of the most interesting man in the world. I'm the opposite. I'm his I'm his foil. I am a husband, dad, little brother, son. I'm also an educator. I like to call myself a semi-retired influencer. Dipped my toes in that world and learned a lot about myself and about writing, and I do some freelance work now, but really I'm just a curious person. In education, we talk about being lifelong learners, and that's something that I do take to heart. And, outside of school hours, I get to pick what I'm curious about. And that's that's the fun part that I want other people to experience and recognize.
Well, I think anyone who knows you would disagree about you being the least interesting man in the world. We think you're pretty interesting and pretty amazing. But also welcome to the semi-retired influencer club.
Well, thank you.
And I think there's quite a few of us, and it's a nice club to be a part of.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing the relationships we were able to form in the Indianapolis area because of that whole new world, right, of influencing, and so that's pretty cool.
100%.
So you've made it pretty clear over the years that you have a pretty deep love of baseball.
Yes.
How did that start?
Well, first I wanted to play baseball, and my dream was always to become a professional baseball player in Cleveland and help the Cleveland ball team win a World Series, since there was a long drought, and then retire and have a farm in Montana, which I don't know why I picked Montana, but I did. And I don't actually like farms, but it seemed like the right thing to do. And I was going to rescue animals in Montana and also have a place where people could rehabilitate their lives. I had deep plans when I was in high school. So, if you didn't have a home and you didn't have a job, you can come and work on the farm and, turn things around and then, find your path. So I think I was just going to buy the farm. I don't think I was going to actually live on the farm because I don't think I can do farm life. But that was the plan. And then during the course of my baseball career, I was cut by 5 different teams.
Oh, goodness.
Pursued playing baseball up through my first year of teaching. So when I was 22, I hung it up as far as trying to make it to the bigs. I still played in an adult league in Cleveland at the time before I moved here, but the aspirations changed. I got into education because of baseball. At one point I was teaching a mini course about the Negro Leagues, and it exposed me to digging into more about the Negro Leagues, and also this idea that teaching in a classroom was a fun thing, and something that I could pursue. So that's how I became a teacher. So baseball led to a lot of different things. It was a source of me learning, some geography. It was a source of me learning some math. It was a source of me learning some history. It was always more than just a game. It was a gateway to a lot of different things for me.
That's pretty amazing. And it's pretty amazing that baseball has had that kind of impact on your life, where it legitimately shaped your career, but in a way that you didn't expect at all, right?
Not the way that I originally wanted to, but but it did, and I think I'm better off for it.
And I think a lot of students would say that they're better off for it as well. So you had this passion, this desire to play in the major leagues. Even though you didn't necessarily say it now, it's always a kid's dream. A kid always imagines, right, that they're going to wind up in the Hall of Fame. The amazing thing is you did, in a lot of ways. Can you tell us about your experience with the Hall of Fame?
Sure. So the funny thing was I had 2 goals. I wanted to make it to the World Series. I wanted to make it to the Hall of Fame. When Cleveland played Chicago in 2016 in the World Series, when the Cubs won the World Series, and which I will still state is the greatest World Series of my lifetime, even though my team lost. I had a friend with an extra ticket, and I wound up at Game 6, which I was hoping would be the clincher for my team, but it was not. We got whooped. Um, but as crazy as it sounds, I was very happy to be um, around Cubs fans and seeing their enjoyment. It was two classy teams, great series. Would love to have come out on top, but it was fun to check out. So the second goal, as you mentioned, was to get to the Hall of Fame. And as a kid, that's what I thought. As I got older, I just wanted to make it to the league and make it on somebody's roster, which did not happen, but that's okay. But I have stayed in touch with doing some research about the Negro Leagues, and there is a symposium on baseball and American culture every year at Cooperstown. So I presented an idea, submitted it, it was accepted, and I had the opportunity to present about the Negro Leagues at Cooperstown the same week that the Negro Leagues statistics were integrated in with all the other Hall of Fame statistics. And it was
Wow.
it was an interesting week to be there because there was a lot of buzz, there was a lot of chatter. But the coolest thing, when I got the acceptance email, I sent it to my sister and I sent it to my parents, and they packed up and they came with me to Cooperstown. So we got to all be there together. And that meant a lot. That meant a lot.
That's very cool. As a lifelong Cardinals fan, I also celebrated for the Cubs. I know that's kind of anathema to a lot of Cardinals fans, but it made sense. It was fun. There was a lot of joy with that series, so I get it, and I'm even more jealous now that you were able to go to one of the games. I'm sorry that it didn't in your favor, but again, you got to check that off of your dream list that you've had since high school. So that's pretty cool. So
yeah.
So now you are what? Are you you're a Hall of Fame historian in some ways, right?
So funny you should say that. When you present, when they accept your presentation, you fill out like this paperwork so they can, put stuff on the website or in the program. And I checked on historian because I didn't see middle school teacher there. And so I started off my presentation, and I was the very last time slot, second to last presenter. So I had been there 2 days previous and have gone to all these other presentations. And you want to talk about imposter syndrome. It's intimidating thinking about all of the research that people have done, how much knowledge they had about baseball. And then after your presentation, they have a Q&A portion. That's the intimidating part because it's the people in the crowd who aren't necessarily presenting, but they know a lot. But the coolest thing was it was probably the nicest crowd to be around. It was so supportive. So the questions weren't like gotcha questions where they're trying to show that you don't know what you're talking about. Everybody's on a journey, and it's an exploration. So I opened my presentation up and I said, I need to apologize because I lied on my
On your application.
my presentation and said that I was a historian. I am not a historian. I'm just a middle school teacher who's curious and has access to Google. And then someone in the crowd shouts out, "We'll make you a historian right there." So they like knighted me in the moment. Um,
That's awesome.
I mean, that's the kind of environment it was. It was so fun to sit and chat with people about so many different aspects of baseball. Um, but it was a lot of fun.
That sounds amazing, and I love hearing that that there's that community spirit, um, because that's what I would expect. I would expect more of the one-upmanship, or almost like you're defending a thesis, right? Instead of like just presenting what you've learned, and we're all on this journey together. I love that. I think that's the way to go about it, to be honest. What did you actually present about in your presentation as a Hall of Fame historian?
Um, so as a newly minted Hall of Fame historian, um, I may have had to pay some people off for that. Um, my presentation was based off of the 1976 movie, The Bingo Long Traveling All Stars and Motor Kings, which to date is the only theatrically released movie about the Negro Leagues. There were a few movies that, I call them adjacent to the history. You have Sandlot, where they talk about the Negro Leagues there. You have the moment in A League of Their Own where the ball goes off the field and black woman picks up the ball and throws it back on the field. But if you don't know the history, you don't really get the significance of that. You have, let's see, 42, which was about Jackie Robinson, really didn't have a whole lot about the Negro Leagues. Doesn't make it a bad movie. Like, let's be clear about that. But there's really no mention of Larry Doby. There's not a whole lot about um, the Negro Leagues that Jackie Robinson came from. So my presentation was about the need for more movies about the Negro Leagues, which, being the week that the statistics were introduced, I'm sure people had a lot of questions like, who's Turkey Stearns? And why would Josh Gibson, the catcher, be, our new career batting average leader? There are lots of things, but also important to me was the idea of the community, because when these games were played, a lot of, depending on, the day and the town, they would go door to door and ask the businesses to shut down so the town could come to the baseball game. And people got dressed up in their finest and would come to the game. It was a community event. And I feel like there's a lot about that we don't know or don't recognize. And it kind of reminds me of the moment a couple of years ago when everybody discovered Black Wall Street and learned about Tulsa. There's a lot of history that we don't know and that we could celebrate, but we don't know about it. So the presentation had a bunch of different ideas of stories that could be told, and I kind of ended with something that I put together, and it's a piece I'm working on to kind of celebrate the community and baseball, but looking at it through a lens of baseball history. So it was fun and engaging, and then I got some interesting questions about it afterwards. For those who don't know, the Bingo Long Traveling All Stars and Motor Kings starred Richard Pryor and James Earl Jones and Billy D. Williams and a host of other people, and was kind of controversial to some people. Some people didn't like the movie. They thought it was horrible. There were other members of the Negro Leagues that did like it and said it was just like what they went through when they played in the league. So it was a matter of opinion, and my point wasn't whether the movie was good or bad or whether I loved it or hated it. It was about the fact that it's the only one. I'm 48 years old. It came out the year I was born. There's been a lot of opportunities to tell a lot of other stories.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, hopefully. You mentioned audience reception. I've looked it up on Rotten Tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
The audience score was 65% right now. So it's still somewhat controversial, I guess you could say. But overall, it has like an 87% positive. So it's considered certified fresh. So if you haven't watched it, and you probably should, it's available online for streaming online, and I'll actually link to that in my show notes. The Bingo Long Traveling All Stars and Motor Kings.
Well, and then the thing that I would encourage people to do, though, and this is what you should do with any movie that's historically based or historically adjacent. Watch the movie, enjoy it for what it is, but then do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Do some reading.
Mm-hmm.
I remember getting out of Greatest Showman was one, Hidden Figures was another, Green Book was another, and I had a lot of questions after I saw those movies. I love Hugh Jackman. Greatest Showman, it was very well choreographed, great music. P.T. Barnum was not the nicest man. He was not Hugh Jackman.
Yeah, there's a lot of whitewashing with that one for sure, or kind of a hagiography, so to speak, like where these biographies of the saints that kind of just highlight all the good things and none of the bad. But for sure, yeah. Of course, an English teacher would tell you to do the research, right? Because that's what you do.
Yeah. Well, and then like Hidden Figures, one of the scenes that gets talked about the most is when Kevin Costner's character strikes down the colored sign outside of the bathroom. That didn't happen because that character didn't exist. That character is a composite of 3 or 4 different characters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that, again, I'm not criticizing the movie, but entertainment is a gateway to history.
Mm-hmm.
We have to make sure we know the difference between entertainment and, historical research. And sometimes things are changed for any number of reasons. And it's on us to, know what it is that we're watching and know what it is that we know about the subject that we're watching about.
Yep, I agree. Know your history, and and when you encounter something, research it more. Like look it up, read more about it, find out more about it, because there is there is a rich history to be uncovered, right? Like you
Right.
mentioned, this is the only movie about the Negro Leagues in, and it's 50 years old. There should be more tellings of that story.
One of the scenes in the movie, Richard Pryor's character is constantly trying to break into the white leagues under the persona of a different person.
Hmm.
And, at first he is trying to pretend that he is a Latin ball player so that he could possibly break into the leagues then. Then something happens to his character and he's kind of taken out. And when he comes back, he's, pretending to be a Native American. And he says, "My name is Chief Tokahama." That actually happened where a team had a black ball player. I believe his name was Charlie Grant. And after the gentleman's agreement, which was in the late 1800s, 1890s, they attempted to put him on the field as a Native American, and he he was uncovered because every city that he went to, they would come to um, the ball field, the black fans, and they would call him by his actual name.
Oh. That's
And I believe it was in Chicago with Charlie Comiskey. He's the one that I think discovered it and called it out, and that was the end of Charlie Grant trying to break into the leagues. And I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's what I'm talking about. Go into the books, look it up, see what there is to see. There is an HBO movie. It's not a theatrical release. It's called Soul of the Game, and it focuses on Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson, which, Bingo Long, the two main characters, are kind of, even though they're based off of the Indianapolis Clowns, you get a lot of echoes of Satch and Josh Gibson with the two of them. But Soul of the Game was another one that I would watch. My grandfather taped it for me. We didn't have cable at all, so definitely no HBO. And I remember him bringing that VHS tape, dating myself, that VHS tape with his scratchy handwriting on it, and he was excited about it to be able to give it to me because he knew I was into that history. But again, I was kind of I was hungry for any sort of exposure that I could get to it.
Well, it sounds like you were the right person at the right time to make this presentation, because of the influence of all of these things leading up to the acceptance of the Negro League statistics and history into Major League Baseball, deciding, rightfully so, them deciding that the Negro Leagues were major leagues, and so it was perfect timing for you. Unfortunately, it's decades after it should have been accepted. It's decades after they should have been legitimately recognized. But for you personally, I guess this helps you become a recognized historian, right?
Well, like I said, there was a lot of conversation about it. And Howard Bryant, who is an author and is on, I believe, ESPN. He was our keynote speaker, and he had a Q&A, and someone asked him what he thought. And it was very interesting because, on the one hand, he said that, obviously they belong, but on the other hand, maybe they shouldn't be meshed in with the historical statistics. And his point was, not whether or not the the stars of the league were good enough, but he said that those players had to carry that burden for their entire life. And in doing so now, are we going to forget about the fact that there were separate leagues 50 years from now? When people look at the statistics and see Josh Gibson's name up there, are they going to realize that he could only play in white stadiums when the white team was out of town, that he couldn't, stay in certain hotels, eat at certain restaurants? Is all of that going to get lost by integrating the statistics? And it was one of those thought-provoking questions where there's not a definitive answer, but it does make you think. Like,
It does.
we still have people aware. If anyone saw the game at Ricketts Field, there was a very large lineup of surviving Negro League players. So right now we do have living history, but 50, 75, 80 years from now, is that history going to be lost? And I guess that's my point of why we need more movies, whether it's a documentary or, again, entertainment's not bad if people do the work, but it's also good for producing conversation.
Right, like A League of Their Own did, right?
Right.
I don't know that many people knew that there was a all women's, or I guess they go all girls baseball league
right.
during World War II, right? And just the presence of a well-made film for entertainment purposes has sparked this interest that's been around for, renewed this interest for decades, right? And I could very easily see that happen.
Right.
Leagues, the Negro Leagues is a part of our conversations every day now, it seems, which is good, because, like Reggie Jackson said in his interview, like it wasn't just this pleasant experience that like we can easily think about. And so I understand why there is a concern 50 years ago about people forgetting what it was like for those players. So yeah, I agree. More films would help.
Well, and to have Reggie Jackson
Yeah.
Say it.
Yeah.
He's post-integration. He started at the end of the 60s. And, here's a guy that he's young in relation to the surviving members of the Negro Leagues. This is in the lifetime of people. This is not something so far away.
Right.
We're not talking about the Titanic. And it's just, it's fascinating to know that history. And I think good art sparks curiosity.
Amen.
I think that's kind of the point behind movies. I mean, one of my favorites is 8 Men Out, and I went back and look to see, what all happened with the Black Sox scandal. Was Shoeless Joe complicit? Here he is in Field of Dreams, and we celebrate him then, but was he part of throwing the World Series? Or was he taken advantage of? I enjoy that.
So what do you think? Should he be in the Hall?
I'm still torn on that. That's a whole nother deep dive to get into. I think that he was taken advantage of. I don't know. I don't know whether or not he fully understood what he was doing, but at the same time, his character in Field of Dreams, that doesn't necessarily fit Shoeless Joe's personality. But again, good art sparks curiosity. So if you didn't know who Shoeless Joe was, you would go back and you'd read about it. That's what I enjoy. It's not about balls and strikes. It's not about batting average. It's about the human experience.
And for some reason, baseball captures that more than any other professional sport. Maybe it's because of its longevity. I don't know, but there's something it's really magical about that field. The Field of Dreams, right?
Right.
That it's just something really, really capturing there. So speaking of good art and speaking of baseball, what are some of your favorite baseball movies?
We've already mentioned Bingo Long. I've watched that many, many times just because, of what it gets me to do research wise. And 8 Men Out, that one I have probably watched the most. I had a conversation with someone about Ty Cobb, and I think that's probably going to be my next deep dive. But I enjoyed watching that movie. But the argument from this individual was that, that was a inaccurate biography and movie about Ty Cobb. There's a lot of stuff that he's blamed for that he didn't do. And so that's what I want to get into a little bit more. So he may be misrepresented in some ways. I'm not saying he's a saint by any means. I'm not saying he's a nice guy, but I'm interested to see that. The Natural has always been my favorite, probably. Natural, Field of Dreams, 42 jumped up there. I thought that was really well done. The Natural is a nostalgic one for me because it's probably one of the first baseball movies I saw. And the music gets me. And then you have movies like Major League, which is, it's comedy. It's comedy.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. So that's probably my unofficial list.
It's a good list to have. I don't know if I've seen all of them that are on your list, but they're on my list to see for sure. And I know that they're highly regarded in a lot of ways as well. I think personally for me, A League of Their Own will always be a favorite of mine.
Yep.
But that's because it was basically filmed in my backyard. I know that's a lot of that reason is because I'm an Evansville native and there was a lot of civic pride in the creation of that movie. And I know people who were in the World Series audience, right, or in the crowd.
That's awesome.
Every year I wind up hearing about more people. So that's really fun, right? But it's also tied to history, and it makes you really care more about the Rockford Peaches and the Racine Bells, right? and what that whole story was about. So circling back to the role that good art can have in the public conversation, you hit the nail on the head about the need for more good films about the story of the Negro Leagues. So thanks for doing that. I'm looking forward to hearing about the project you're working on. Will that be something you will share publicly, or do I
Uh, hopefully it gets shared publicly. It's something that I have a premise and I have an idea, but I want to. So the premise, kind of simply stated, without giving out too much information, so someone doesn't write it before I do.
Right.
But
Right.
looking at what's happened to some of these communities that were prosperous before, and kind of looking from present time or near present time, and then taking a look back to see what it was, the before and after, and also dealing with the idea of how do we maintain history, the good, the bad, the ugly, like it's all mixed in. There are stories of resilience, and then there are triumphs, and I don't want to say failures, but losses, involved. So kind of trying to encompass all of that. It's inspired by a house that is no longer in my childhood neighborhood. I used to have a paper route when I was a kid, and we were fascinated by this one house. There's an older lady that lived there, and she could be really gruff, but there was a reason for that gruffness. She also had a lot of pride. And some people look at that and see, a bad thing or someone who's out of touch. Whereas I think the route that I'm taking with the story is searching for the reason and searching for the story behind that. So that's where I am with that project, and gonna keep working on it. And with all my extra time during the school year, and during the summer, that's what I'm looking to do. But I will also throw out a plug. If you are interested in the Negro Leagues and you have not gone to Kansas City to see the Negro League Museum, that is worth the trip. If you can't make a trip to Kansas City and you own a PlayStation 5 or know someone who owns one, and you get MLB The Show, Bob Kendrick, who's the director of the Negro League Museum, is on the game, and there are segments that you can play, and they introduce you to different players from the Negro League, and he tells you stories about them. He tells you, the statistics, their strengths in the field, at the plate, et cetera, et cetera. Bob Kendrick is like sitting in your living room and telling you all about the Negro Leagues.
Wow.
And I made a trip there 2 years ago, and it's not the biggest museum, but it is packed with so much history, and the layout is beautiful. There is a diamond in the middle of it with statues of, but probably the most prominent player for each position. And Buck O'Neill is in the dugout. And if you don't know who Buck O'Neill is, he's got a book. Read his book. He was a champion for the history of the leagues. He played in the leagues, managed in the leagues, was a baseball scout for Major League Baseball. These are the voices that we need to promote because, again, it's not just about baseball. There's so much American history involved in it. Sorry, we went from movies to a plug about the Negro League Baseball Museum.
Well, it sounds like it needs a plug, and it sounds like something everyone should visit. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us. So you do in all of your spare time, because that's all teachers have is spare time.
That's right.
That's all parents have. That's all parents have is spare time too. So you have tons of it, tons of spare time.
Right.
You do some freelance writing as well.
I do.
So you have a website, creedative.com,
Yes.
creedative.com.
Yes.
I'll add a link to that in the show notes as well. People are welcome to come check you out, find out a little bit more about the guy that we already all know you, and we already are big fans of you.
That's very kind of you to say.
But it's it's very kind of you to appear on this podcast as well. I've appreciated you taking the time and sharing, dropping some knowledge a little bit and some of your passion about this important historical segment, this important part of our story as an American society. I've really enjoyed talking to you about this, and I'm still just like over the moon excited that you got to speak at the Hall of Fame. Maybe I'm even a little jealous because that's pretty cool, and I hope that it's a memory that you will always look fondly upon.
It is definitely a core memory.
Cool.
And I would encourage people, if they are interested in doing a presentation or even just going to the symposium, if you love baseball, if you love history, it is a great place to go. You can apply. If I did it, anybody can do it. You can apply. You can even say you're a historian. The crowd will be friendly and happy to see you there. So I would encourage people to do that. Or if you're listening and baseball isn't your thing, whatever your thing is, find it, do it. Go ahead and take the shot.
What's holding you back? What are you waiting for? Right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. Just go do the thing. Right?
Right.
So thank you for doing the thing, Creed. And I hope someone else takes the time to learn more about the Negro Leagues. Maybe watch one of the films or watch the film, right, that you talked about. And then find what you're passionate about and go after it. You didn't have to do it just when you were 20 years old, right?
Right.
We're both in our late 40s and still pursuing dreams. And that's a pretty cool thing.
Well, that's important for our kids to see too. You know?
Yep, for sure. Thanks again so much for joining me today, Creed.
Thank you for having me, Matt. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much for listening today, and thanks again to Creed for sharing his incredible story. You can find out more information about Creed on my website, mattdantodd.com. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe on your favorite listening platform. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, shoot them my way at matt@mattdantodd.com. The Matt Dan Toddcast podcast is brought to you by, well, me. but I'm always open to sponsorship opportunities. Theme song is by Paul Uden.